it's all just based on the exact same strategy that helped my wife and I quit our jobs at 28, and now we sort of travel around 6 months a year overseas, and we'll continue to do that, just using the cash flow from properties.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategies. I'm Tyron Shum, and in this episode on Property Investory, we're speaking with Scott O'Neill, who had retired at the age of 28. You'll learn how he's able to travel the world in style, earning $300,000 from his property investments, and how he's able to help everyday property investors achieve success, plus much more. So in, say, 60 seconds or less, what do you actually do in any given day?
So every day, not every day, I'll wake up and go to the gym or possibly surf in the morning. I'll wake up, and then when I get back, I'll look through my emails, check what properties agents have sent me over the last day or so. If there's any good ones in there, I normally carry out a very thorough due diligence, prepare them for clients. And then I'll spend the afternoon actually just talking to my clients and possibly linking them up with actual properties that suit their needs. And it's a very busy day that sort of can actually involve travel. So I do travel often to certain parts of Australia looking at these properties. And yeah, basically then just have a relaxing evening. And that was pretty much just a standard day.
That's Scott O'Neill, and he's the director of Rethink Investing, a business that helps people see the numbers behind what they're doing. As a professional investor, his mindset focuses on finding the best return on investment. But how does he do this?
I grew up in that type of environment, and I was always of the opinion of, let's say you buy a cafe, you wouldn't go buy a cafe just to lose $100,000 to claim 30 grand back. And that's sort of the negative geared mindset. I like the idea of making money during the year. And so what if I have to pay a little bit of tax back, each quarter or at the end of the year? I'm still making more money than I was losing. And that positive geared mindset was unique to our family. I don't think that was one that I had any influences from. I didn't read about it. I actually fell onto it with a little bit of luck. My very first property was in Sutherland in Sydney, and it was a house in granny flat. It was an old house, wasn't the best street, but I paid $480 for it back in 2010. And it was renting for nearly $700 a week. And that was enough to cover all the costs. And even after all the mortgages, all the maintenance, everything was taken out, I was still left with cash flow at the end of the year. And I didn't really appreciate how good that property was at the time, but that was, a classic lesson. If you get the right property at the start of your portfolio, you can just go so much further.
Before building up his portfolio and businesses, O'Neill looked at a different career path. This coincidentally opened up exciting property opportunities and led him to where he currently is.
So I grew up in the Sutherland Shire in Sydney, and I went to school at Newington. So it was a disciplined school, and that took me into an engineering degree at uni. So I was a civil engineer. I spent 2 years building railways in Sydney, and then the long hours and all that sort of pushed me towards, because I was working Saturdays and Sundays, Christmas Eve, New Year's, like whenever people are not on train lines, I was working. And that, over a 40-year career sounded pretty, it wasn't really the best direction to go. So I took another job, but that took me out of Sydney into Port Macquarie. So I was managing like sand mines and aggregate mines and concrete plants. So it was a different job, but there was a lot of people management. But the real sort of benefit of that was it took me out of Sydney, and it opened my eyes to property markets other than just Sydney. And when I was up there, I did purchase a property, which we'll go into a little bit later, I guess. But spending 3 years out of Sydney was a very good experience. And I then did an MBA for Uni of New South Wales, which I got 3/4 of the way through until I realised everything we were learning was basically unrelated to the business I was starting, and there was just basically no use for it.
From these unsuccessful learning experiences, O'Neill started to focus on his true passion of property investing.
I then actually deferred that MBA and basically just concentrated on property investing in this business that I'm running, and that sort of leads us to where we are now. And currently, my business, Rethink Investing, is one of the fastest growing buyers agents in the country, agency should I say, and it's all just based on the exact same strategy that helped my wife and I quit our jobs at 28, and now we sort of travel around 6 months a year overseas, and we'll continue to do that, just using the cash flow from properties.
Of course, nothing can be achieved without a little hard work.
When I do travel, I don't not work. Like, I remember being in Greece last year, there was an internet connection, still means I can open up the emails and do a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours at night, just catching up, making sure everything's running smoothly. And agents actually still send me properties without me making phone calls. So I never had to actually, talk to these agents over the phone, because I just send an agent a checklist of due diligence. I make sure it's all factual and, run comparable sales reports myself. All this can be done remotely. So there isn't really a need to physically be in one place. And, we were living in Greece at the time last year for 6 months, and our cost of living there was basically nothing. It's like, we're eating, $10 of food a day or €10 a day, and the cost just wasn't there. So there's no reason why you can't do it continually. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment, and we thought, why not chase the summers for a while.
With minimal work in an endless summer, O'Neill had made his life the perfect 4-hour work week, as coined by Tim Ferriss.
I actually did read that book a while ago, and it was before I started any of this, and definitely I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I definitely sort of saw a lot of a way of life that I wanted to follow, and he's the first to sort of make it public, I guess.
For O'Neill, property investment is a perfect way of life rather than a get-rich-quick scheme.
Like, my wife lost her mother a couple of years ago, and it really just made us appreciate life as well, and that's why we've really stuck to it. Most people end up just trying to forever expand a business or chase the dollars, but for us it's really about actually living the lifestyle that you wanted when you were starting out. And we've got ties in Europe, so we do spend a lot of time there, and we will continue to do so. And it's really, this was never about to get rich. It was always about being able to buy our time back. And, cash flow is the only way to do that. And we didn't go into big developments and stuff like that because they're just time consuming. We could have made more money in other areas, but, there was a lot more risk. And this is just a way of being able to make money safely whilst keeping your time, and, you'd be able to continually build off it as well, year after year.
O'Neill did not let early hurdles and pitfalls deter him from attaining his desired lifestyle.
As a property investor, I'd see myself as fairly conservative, which might sound quite random because I own so many properties, but I bought my first property in 2010, which was actually a very negative year for Australian property. And I always had the mindset that property was going down at the time. I was reading a lot of forums, and everyone was calling it a 30 or 40% drop in property prices. So I kind of was starting with a bit of a negative mindset, and that pushed me towards positively geared property. And the reason for that was, if it didn't grow that year, I was still getting a return out of my investment via cash flow, which made me feel a lot better about entering the property market, even if the time wasn't perfect. So I am basically slightly negative base, but that kind of just means I'm just preparing for when times aren't as great as they currently are. But I have a large mindset, so I really like the idea of building large portfolios.
Coming up after the break, we'll delve into O'Neill's journey on how he became a property investor and how he grew his property portfolio.
So I was saving a deposit, and when I was 23, I finally got the property I was looking for, that was that Sutherland property, which was positively geared.
As well as the worst tenants he's ever experienced.
There's a lot of those people that get rejected from the mainstream rental agencies because they've had a bad past, and some of them started going bad.
We'll also hear about O'Neill's aha moment that kicked off his property investment journey.
The aha moment was when I was still Sydney focused. Everyone I ever spoke to kept saying, buy in Sydney, because it's always going to go up.
And that's next. I'm Tyron Shum from Property Investory. O'Neill's first property was in the coastal suburb of Sutherland, but his first attempts at purchasing property were anything but calm.
So when I was 17, I remember talking to a mate and we were trying to buy a property together because we heard one of our tradie mates who'd been working for many years just got into the property market. So that excited me. I really wanted to get into property. And obviously the bank just said, go away, you've got no full-time job, no deposit's not enough. Basically got rejected. So I finally got an approval when I was 22. So 5 years later, I was working, 4 or 5 days a week in bars, and, I was travelling at the same time. But even when I travelled, we were in Canada, I was a chef, and I went to the Gold Coast for a year and I was working in the nightclub. So I was always working. So I was saving a deposit. And when I was 23, I finally got the property I was looking for. That was that Sutherland property, which was positively geared. So I came up with a deposit at the time. It was 10% of the property's value. So plus stamp duty, we got the first homeowners grant, so that didn't have to pay stamp duty. So basically got into that property and it was positively geared, so I was saving even quicker.
From this eventual laborious success, O'Neill leapfrogged his way into the Australian market, making waves wherever he landed.
My third property is probably my favourite one because it was in Port Macquarie. This is about 6 months later, 12 months later, I can't quite remember, but it was a mortgagee repossession sale. It was 4 units on one title, and there was a price guide of $500,000, and no one showed up for this auction, and ended up negotiating it for $425 later that night. Bought it on the spot. It was renting for $800 a week. There's 4 units on it. They're all renting out for $200 each. And I went back to the bank about 3 months later and it got revalued at $500. So that's $75,000. I basically had another deposit for another property, and then I went up to Gold Coast at the time and bought a 3-unit subdivision up there where I could actually strata title it. And again, I was just uncapping all this equity by just buying unit blocks, and then just I kept just repeating that and bought another unit block up in the Gold Coast. I bought a property down at Cooma, which there was 4 units down there on one title, and then just got into some other stuff like renovators. Bought in Ipswich, bought like a house in the Gold Coast, which could be renovated a little bit. Couple of dual incomes in Brisbane, which are, upstairs, downstairs arrangements. So basically like a granny flat. But each time I was kind of acquiring another 5 to 10 grand cash flow a year. So this income was growing quick. And our first goal was to replace my wife's income, which happened pretty quickly after a few properties. And then the next goal I was still working in Port Macquarie at the time, was to replace my income. And eventually we did.
Eventually, O'Neill's little pond grew too small, and he made his next big success in commercial property investing.
Then the business would start on the side, and more about my portfolio. I started getting into commercial. That was the next big step. I was really nervous because I felt like I didn't have the expertise like I did in residential property markets, but commercial turned out to be better again. So I bought my first property was a little supermarket in Perth. So it was a dead market over there. It still is, but it had a 5-year lease on it, and the tenant has never missed a payment, and it was returning a huge amount. I bought it, the total price was $620,000. It was renting for $72,000 a year, and they paid all the outgoings. And then I bought a medical centre in Perth as well, same deal. There's no one buying over there at the moment, so it was kind of like a bit of a free ride in terms of you could dictate the price.
But everyone tends to experience a bad investing moment, as O'Neill recounts of his earlier investing years.
Back when I was starting, I was quite frugal, so every dollar I had to save. So that involved myself managing a lot of properties. So I was self-managing. And to take shortcuts, I used to put Gumtree ads on, so because it saves money. It's basically a free ad compared to paying realestate.com. And it all worked out pretty well, but I ended up managing about probably 12, 13 different tenants at any period of time. And I was also doing an MBA and working full-time and travelling from Port Macquarie to Sydney quite often. And then because I was not an expert rental manager, a few of these tenants started turning bad because they were coming through the back door, like Gumtree. There's a lot of those people that get rejected from the mainstream rental agencies because they've had a bad past. And some of them started going bad. So there was, I remember my first property I bought, they had some drug addicts in there and they destroyed the house. And there was actually a mother in there and her kids were actually turning on her. So she vanished in the night. She was okay. She got taken by the authorities for protection, but the house was left in the biggest disaster state I've ever seen. And, right at the same time, there was a similar one going on at the Gold Coast as well. So I basically had two horrible tenancy problems at the same time. And to be honest, since then I haven't had any. And I've had over 100 different tenants over the years. And it's just doing it myself is just a mistake. It saved me a little bit of money in the short term, but in the long term, it cost me a lot because I had vacancies after these periods. I had damages. I was able to claim a lot back on landlord insurance, but it was just probably the most stressed I've been.
From this worst investing moment, O'Neill has definitely learnt the hard way that a man is not an island.
Basically just not to try to do everything yourself. Rely on experts. Like rental managers, this is all they do all day. Of course, they're going to know more about interviewing the applicants better than you. They'll have a database of their own. They may even know tenants that have previously been managed in their other properties. So for someone to try to save $20, $30 a week in rental management, it was short-sighted on my behalf, and it was a good lesson.
Conversely, O'Neill has had many aha moments in his years as a property investor, but his favourite will always be discovering the housing markets outside of Sydney.
The aha moment was when I was still Sydney-focused. Everyone I ever spoke to kept saying, buy in Sydney, because it's always going to go up. It's the only place to be. And I was of that belief at the time as well. But I went to this Port Macquarie place. No one showed up. As I said, we bought it for $425 and it was rented for $800 a week. So the cash flow after all costs on that was over $15,000 per annum in my pocket. But then I went back to the bank 3 months later and it got revalued at $500,000. So I made $75,000 equity on top of that cash flow, which leapfrogged me into another property. So that basically told me I'd be able to create equity quicker than I was earning it, and also building a forever income, because I wasn't planning to sell these anytime soon. It was the idea of holding these into my 50s and 60s and even longer. And imagine having that income of $15,000 and growing, even, when I was 26 at the time and carrying it on. It was just, you become obsessed. You go, I want 10 of these, because then instead of $15,000 a year, it's $150,000 a year. And that's enough for me not to work. And then I've still got a growing asset under that residual cash flow as well. And that was probably the light bulb moment that goes, I knew that I could still find good cash flow. It wasn't just sit in Sydney and do what everyone else was doing. It was look around the country and just, you can find good deals today. It's good, even the very first property I bought, renting for $700 a week, I paid $480 for it. I can still find those types of returns today. It's not in Sydney. That's the only difference. And it was just an eye-opening experience, that one. Just look outside your own backyard.
So, inspired by this story and what Scott O'Neill is excited about today, we'll keep the conversation going in a future episode on Property Investing podcast, where we talk about how to apply the strategy.
The strategy never really changed. It was always just buy properties that, give an income back and also have an upside in growth.
There will be easy to follow action steps.
Buying in a ratio of 2 growth properties for every high cash flow. So my growth ones still were good cash flow. They had a minimum 6% yield on them.
2 success habits for property investing.
So there's a little bit of goal setting involved, but goal setting around lifestyle as well, not just money all the time, which most people do.
And that's next time on Property Investing podcast.